The night was bitter enough to bite through bone. Frost clung to the pavement like shattered glass, and the wind carved its way through empty streets, carrying the hollow echo of a dog's whimper. Huddled beneath the rusted frame of an abandoned car, a German shepherd curled tighter into himself, ribs sharp beneath his dull coat, breath rising in fragile clouds that vanished almost as soon as they formed. His eyes, once bright, once trusting, were dull now, glassy with the exhaustion of too many nights alone. People had passed him for weeks. Some slowed their pace, pity flashing in their faces before hurrying on. Others threw scraps that never seemed enough. No one stopped long enough to notice how his paws trembled with each movement, how he struggled to stand, how his body was surrendering to the cold. But that night, when the moon sank low and the frost thickened, something shifted. Footsteps approached, steady and unhurried. A voice cut through the wind, soft but certain. For the first time in weeks, his name, though he no longer remembered it, was called into the dark, and the dog, broken and half ready to give up, lifted his head. The wind clawed through the alley like invisible hands, pulling scraps of paper into the night sky, rattling metal lids, and carrying with it the sharp bite of December cold. Beneath the husk of a derelict car, a German shepherd lay curled into himself, nose pressed to his trembling paws. His fur, once the proud armor of his kind, had dulled into patchy shades of dust and ash, the cold gnawing its way past every layer of his body. Each breath rose in frail clouds, breaking apart before they could even reach the light of the street lamp flickering above him. For weeks, this place had been his prison of choice, not because it offered comfort, but because it offered cover from the stares, the shouts, the feet that hurried past without slowing. Sometimes a hand had tossed a stale piece of bread his way, sometimes a heel had kicked too close, forcing him deeper into shadows. His ribs pressed like sharp rocks against his skin, and hunger was no longer a pain, but a dull, constant ache he wore like a second coat. He had stopped waiting for warmth. The nights had taught him that warmth belonged to houses with closed doors, to families laughing over meals he could smell but never reach. His trust, whatever little remained, was buried under frost, sealed away with each night spent alone. The sound of footsteps made his ears flick, but never his body move. He had learned that to approach was to invite disappointment, or worse. But that night the storm carried a weight different from the others. Snow fell heavy, blanketing the streets in white silence, muffling even the hum of passing cars. The shepherd shivered harder, curling tighter, muscles twitching as if fighting invisible battles. His eyes, tired and dim, fluttered closed against the sting of the wind. For a moment, he let his body surrender, his mind slipping into that fragile place between rest and an end he no longer feared. The world seemed to fade into stillness, until, suddenly, the crunch of deliberate footsteps cut through the snow. They did not hurry, nor did they veer away. They drew closer. A beam of light sliced beneath the car, spilling warmth into his icy corner. The shepherd flinched, eyes snapping open, a low growl vibrating through his hollow chest. He had been found. The footsteps stopped. A voice rose above the storm, soft but steady, words he did not understand, but a tone that carried something he had almost forgotten, something that sounded like care. And for the first time in weeks, the shepherd lifted his head. The beam of the flashlight trembled slightly as the figure crouched low, the light falling across the shepherd's face. His eyes, clouded but still holding fragments of amber fire, caught the glow for a fleeting second before darting away. His body pressed tighter against the frozen ground, as if he could disappear into the shadows of the rusted frame. The woman's breath misted in the air. Her gloved hands stretched out slowly, palms up. She spoke again, her voice low, almost a whisper, carried carefully over the howl of the wind. He answered with another growl, though it was weak, more plea than threat. His legs shifted beneath him, trying to stand, but his muscles betrayed him, quivering and collapsing under his weight. Her heart clenched as she watched him falter. She had seen him from afar for days, passing glimpses of the same curled figure under different corners of the street. She had told herself each time, "Tomorrow I'll stop. Tomorrow I'll bring food. Tomorrow I'll try." But tomorrow had stretched too long, and now, seeing the bones pressing against his skin, she realized tomorrow might not exist for him. Snow fell heavier, thickening into sheets that blurred the city's edges. She moved closer, one knee sinking into the icy slush, ignoring the sting against her skin. From her bag she pulled a piece of cooked chicken, the steam rising faintly against the freezing air. She laid it on the ground between them. The shepherd's nose twitched. Hunger betrayed his caution, his body inching forward despite the tremor in his limbs. He sniffed, eyes locked on hers, waiting for the trap that life had taught him always followed kindness. Yet no trap came. Only her hand, still open, still waiting. With a tentative movement, he snapped up the piece, swallowing too fast, nearly choking. A small sound escaped his throat, half cough, half whimper. She winced, then reached to place another piece closer. This time when he moved, their distance closed by a fraction, but his strength was waning. As he swallowed, his legs buckled again, body slumping into the snow. Panic flared in her chest. She set aside the bag, pushing the flashlight between her teeth, freeing both hands. Gently, slowly, she slid her arms beneath him. He jerked, startled, but his body had no fight left. His growl died into a faint whine as he sagged against her chest. Heavier than his fragile frame appeared. Her breath caught. Was this collapse the end, or a fragile surrender? The weight in her arms was limp, frighteningly still. She held him tighter, whispering words she hoped might tether him to her warmth, words neither of them could afford to lose to the night. The snow swirled harder around them, erasing footprints, erasing time. All that remained was a woman clutching a dog who might already be slipping away. And as she stood, his head rolled against her shoulder, eyes half closed, dangerously quiet. Would he make it through this storm? Or had she come too late? The night swallowed the streets as she hurried, the shepherd's limp frame pressed tight against her chest. Each step felt heavier, not just from his weight, but from the dread coiling in her stomach. His breath, shallow and uneven, brushed against her scarf, carrying the faint scent of damp fur and despair. The storm whipped harder, stinging her cheeks, but she clung to him as if the world itself were trying to pry him away. She whispered words into the wind, not knowing why, perhaps to comfort herself as much as the dog in her arms. "It's okay. I've got you now. Just hold on a little longer." Her voice trembled, yet it was steady enough to break through the howling night. With each syllable, she hoped he might hear something he had forgotten existed: tenderness. The shepherd stirred faintly, a twitch of his ear, a low, broken whine. It wasn't much, but it was life. She pressed her cheek against his head, feeling the rough edges of his fur, the chill clinging to his skin. "Stay with me," she murmured again, as though repetition could bind him to her. Her car was parked 2 streets away, its metal shell dusted with snow. She stumbled toward it, fumbling with the keys, her gloves stiff with ice. For a heart-stopping moment, she thought she had lost him. The rise and fall of his chest seemed to vanish. Panic surged. She shifted him in her arms, desperate to feel breath. Then, mercifully, a faint exhale fogged the cold air. Relief shook her knees, and she nearly dropped him. She laid him gently across the back seat, tucking an old blanket around his fragile frame. His body shivered violently, then stilled, the line between survival and surrender growing thinner by the second. She slammed the door shut, heart pounding as if she were racing against an invisible clock. Behind the wheel, her hands trembled against the steering wheel. The roads were slick, ice glittering under the headlights like a cruel trap. She drove anyway, every turn a battle between caution and urgency. In the mirror, she glanced at the shepherd's still form. His head rested awkwardly on the seat, eyes half-lidded, chest rising so faintly she had to lean forward to convince herself he was still breathing. She whispered again, though he could not understand, "Don't leave me now. Not like this. Not when I just found you." Her words cracked against the silence, heavy with desperation. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside that car a fragile tether formed between a dying dog and the stranger who refused to let him go. Yet as the clinic lights finally appeared in the distance, glowing faint through the curtain of snow, his body jerked once, then slumped frighteningly still. Her foot pressed the accelerator harder. The line between too late and just in time narrowed into seconds. The glass doors of the veterinary clinic swung open with a bang as she burst inside, the shepherd limp in her arms. Warm air rushed against her face, a violent contrast to the storm's icy grip, but she hardly noticed. "Please, help!" Her voice cracked, splintering the sterile silence of the waiting room. 2 technicians rushed forward, their expressions tightening at the sight of the dog. One reached for him, the other pulling a gurney from the wall. She hesitated for a heartbeat, her arms unwilling to let go. But the shepherd gave no sign of protest, no flicker of resistance. That silence tore her deeper than any growl ever could. Reluctantly, she laid him on the gurney. The vet, a man in his 50s with lines of exhaustion etched across his face, appeared from the hallway, pulling gloves on with brisk precision. His eyes swept over the shepherd's thin frame, the matted fur, the trembling breaths. Severe hypothermia, malnourished, weak pulse. His words carried no drama, only fact, but the heaviness behind them made her chest constrict. They wheeled him quickly into the back room. She followed, breathless, her boots squeaking against the tiled floor. The fluorescent lights glared down, harsh and unkind, illuminating every detail she wished she could unsee. The way his ribs shifted with each shallow breath, the purple-gray tinge at the edges of his gums. "Is he going to make it?" she asked, voice small, almost childlike. The vet didn't answer right away. He pressed a stethoscope against the shepherd's chest, listening intently. "It's going to be close," he said finally, his tone clipped but not unkind. "Another night outside and he wouldn't have survived. Even now, it depends on whether his body can fight." Technicians swarmed around, wrapping heated blankets over him, sliding an IV needle into his vein. The shepherd flinched weakly, then went still again. The monitor beeped, each sound too faint, too slow. She stood frozen at the edge of the room, hands twisting the hem of her coat, her breath coming in shallow bursts. She remembered his eyes under the car, dull, defeated, almost ready to close forever. Now those same eyes were barely open, glazed with exhaustion, but she willed them to see her. She leaned close, her hand hovering before resting gently against his paw. "You're safe now," she whispered. "Please don't give up." "Not yet." For a fleeting moment his paw twitched against her hand. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred. Was it reflex, or was it his way of answering? The monitor beeped again. Then suddenly it stuttered. The line wavered, the sound faltering. A technician's voice rose, urgent. "We're losing him!" The room erupted into motion. And as she stood rooted to the floor, tears burning her cheeks, one thought crashed through her mind with unbearable clarity. What if she had been too late? The room was thick with tension, as though the very air had learned to hold its breath. The monitor's erratic beeps sliced through the silence, each sound a countdown she couldn't control. The shepherd lay draped in blankets, an IV line trailing from his leg, his body trembling despite the warmth surrounding him. His fur was damp, his breaths shallow, the rise and fall of his chest so faint it seemed like a cruel trick. The vet barked orders with calm precision, though his eyes betrayed urgency. "Increase the fluids. Raise the heat pad. Keep stimulating him." The technicians moved swiftly, adjusting dials, pressing warm packs against his sides, rubbing his paws to coax circulation. Every action seemed both heroic and heartbreakingly desperate. She stood at the edge, fists clenched, her whole body trembling as though her own life were tethered to his. She wanted to close her eyes, but couldn't. If she looked away, even for a second, she feared he would slip into nothingness. She pressed her palm against the cold metal counter to steady herself, the chill grounding her against the wave of fear threatening to drown her. Her mind raced with self-blame. Why didn't I stop sooner? Why did I wait until tonight? Every moment replayed in her mind, passing him in the alley, telling herself someone else would help, promising herself she'd return the next day. And now here he was, straddling the fragile line between life and death, because she hadn't been brave enough sooner. The vet's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "If you had waited one more night, he wouldn't have survived." The words cut deep, heavy with the weight of truth. Her breath hitched, and she nodded, though the guilt pressed harder against her chest. She looked down at him again, at the dog who hadn't asked for anything except to be noticed, and her heart splintered. "Come on, boy," she whispered, voice cracking. "You've made it this far. Don't stop now. Please, just fight." She reached out, her fingers brushing his paw. For a moment it felt lifeless, limp beneath her touch. But then, faintly, barely there, a twitch. Her heart leapt. The vet noticed it too, glancing at her briefly. "That's something. Keep talking to him. Sometimes that helps more than you'd think." So she did. She spoke softly, spilling words she didn't know she had inside her. She told him he wasn't alone anymore, that there would be warm beds, open fields, food that filled him, hands that wouldn't hurt. Her words trembled, but carried truth, a promise woven into every syllable. The monitor steadied slightly, the beeps finding a fragile rhythm. It was no miracle yet, but it was hope. She clung to that sound as though it were the only anchor left in the storm. But just as her chest eased, the shepherd jerked violently, his body convulsing against the blankets. The monitor wailed, alarms flashing red, and in an instant, hope slipped back into terror. The shepherd's body convulsed in sharp, terrifying spasms, his legs thrashing weakly against the gurney. The monitor screamed with shrill urgency, lines dipping and spiking, a chaotic symphony of danger. Technicians held him gently but firmly, keeping him from injuring himself, while the vet leaned over with laser focus. "Seizure," the vet said, voice clipped, steady despite the storm unfolding before them. "Get diazepam, now!" A syringe was prepared in seconds, the needle sliding into his IV port with practiced precision. The shepherd's body stiffened, then slowly began to ease, the violent tremors giving way to quivers, then stillness. His chest rose shallowly, uncertain, fragile. She stood frozen, her nails digging into her palms so hard she barely noticed the sting. Fear clawed at her throat. She wanted to rush forward, to gather him in her arms, but she couldn't move, couldn't risk interrupting the hands that held his life. Her whispered pleas spilled into the sterile air. "Don't leave, not now. Please, not now." The vet watched the monitor, waiting, listening. Seconds stretched like hours. Then, finally, the erratic peaks began to soften, the alarm silenced. The green line steadied into a rhythm again, weak, but consistent. Relief collapsed her knees, and she caught herself against the counter, her breath breaking into sobs she had fought too long to hold back. A technician placed a hand on her shoulder briefly, grounding her, before moving back to adjust the fluids. "He's not out of the woods," the vet said, eyes still fixed on the fragile rhythm of the monitor. His voice softened slightly, acknowledging the storm of emotion in the room. "But he's fighting. That's more than I expected, given his condition." She wiped at her tears, nodding rapidly. "He has to fight. I'll stay as long as it takes. He can't be alone again." Her voice wavered, but the conviction beneath it was unshakable. The vet's gaze met hers for a moment, and there was something unspoken there. Respect, perhaps, or quiet recognition. He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "Then keep talking to him. He knows your voice now. That may be the tether keeping him here." She moved closer, carefully placing her hand over the shepherd's paw once more. His fur was coarse, damp, still cool under the layers of heated blankets. She leaned down, her forehead nearly touching his, whispering through the lump in her throat. "You're not going back out there. Not while I'm here. I promise." A faint sound escaped his throat, almost imperceptible, a sigh or maybe a groan. To her it was enough. It was proof he heard, proof he still lingered on the edge but hadn't let go. The clinic quieted, the storm outside muffled by the hum of machines and the steady rhythm of a heart refusing to surrender. Yet even in that fragile calm, every eye in the room knew one truth. The shepherd's fight was far from over, and as dawn threatened to break, the question remained. Would he see it? The days that followed felt like a fragile balancing act, each one suspended between progress and relapse. The shepherd remained in the clinic, wrapped in warmth, tethered to life by the steady drip of fluids and the quiet hum of machines. His ribs still jutted sharply, his fur still carried the dull shadow of neglect, but there was a shift, so small, so delicate, that only the most attentive eyes could see. His chest rose with more certainty now. His breaths, though shallow, no longer rattled like brittle glass. She came every morning, her hands raw from the cold, but always carrying fresh hope in the warmth of her voice. At first he barely moved when she entered. His eyes flickered open, glazed, and drifted shut again, as if conserving what little strength remained. But she kept talking. She told him stories of places he had never seen, of green fields where grass swayed like gentle waves, of rivers that sparkled under the sun, of homes where doors opened wide instead of slamming shut. The vet warned her that recovery wasn't guaranteed. "His body's weak, but it's his trust that will take longer to mend," he said one evening, arms crossed as he studied the shepherd's quiet form. "These dogs, remember, they carry wounds you can't see." She knew that truth already. She had seen it in the way he flinched at sudden movement, in the way his ears flattened when a stranger's voice rose too loud. Even as his body gathered fragments of strength, his spirit trembled like glass at the slightest touch. One afternoon, she brought a small bowl of boiled chicken, kneeling on the tiled floor, holding it out carefully. His nose twitched, eyes narrowing with suspicion. Hunger tugged at him, but fear held him back. Minutes stretched in silence, her arm trembling under the weight of stillness. Then, slowly, cautiously, he inched forward. His tongue brushed the food, then retreated. Her breath caught, afraid to break the spell. A second try, a third. Finally he began to eat, each bite fast, frantic, as if the food might vanish. She whispered softly, steadying him with her voice, "It's yours, all of it. No one will take it away." For the first time, he didn't bolt back to the far corner after finishing. Instead, he lingered, his eyes meeting hers for the briefest moment. It was not trust yet, not forgiveness, but it was a crack in the walls he had built, and that night, as she left the clinic, she turned once more to see him. He was watching her go, his head lifted from the blanket. A fragile flicker of recognition stirred in his eyes. She smiled through the ache in her chest. The first thread of something new had been woven, but would it hold? Weeks blurred together in the rhythm of care. The shepherd grew stronger, though his progress was uneven, like a flame that flared one moment and guttered the next. His legs regained the power to carry him, but his steps were hesitant, each one shadowed by memory. He startled at the clang of dropped instruments, his tail tucking tight as though bracing for harm. Yet when she spoke, his ears pricked, his body stilled. His gaze sought her out with fragile longing. One evening, after the clinic had closed, she asked the vet if she could take him outside for a short walk. "He needs the air," she said, her voice lined with hope. The vet hesitated, then nodded. "Just a few minutes. Don't push him." The winter air was sharp but clear, the storm long past. Snow still crusted the sidewalks, but the sky stretched wide, scattered with faint stars. She clipped the leash gently to his collar, her hands trembling, not from cold but from the weight of the moment. He froze when the door opened, ears flattening, paws digging against the floor. "Come on," she coaxed softly. "It's safe now? You're safe!" He stepped out reluctantly, his body hunched, head low. The leash stayed slack, but his eyes darted at every sound, tires crunching over snow, a door shutting in the distance, the faint bark of another dog. She walked slowly, letting him set the pace, her own steps careful, deliberate. For a few minutes it seemed impossible. He looked ready to bolt at every shadow. Then came a shift. He paused, nose lifted to the air, nostrils flaring, the scent of pine, of earth under snow, of something familiar and untarnished. He stood still, his body trembling, then took a single step forward. Another. His paws pressed into the snow, leaving prints that glowed faintly in the streetlight. She exhaled a laugh that caught in her throat, tears burning at the edges of her eyes. "That's it," she whispered, as though speaking too loud would shatter the moment. For the first time, he walked beside her. Not perfectly, not confidently, but willingly. Each step was an act of courage, each glance toward her a question. "Can I trust this? Can I trust you?" And every time she answered with the same quiet steadiness, "Yes." When they returned inside, she unclipped the leash, kneeling to his level. He hesitated, then pressed his nose gently against her palm. The touch was fleeting, gone in a heartbeat, but it sent warmth surging through her veins. It was not yet loyalty, not yet love, but it was choice, his choice. And choice was the beginning of everything. Still, she knew the walls were not gone, only cracking. Tomorrow could bring retreat. Tomorrow could test them again. But tonight, in the fragile quiet, he had taken a step forward, and she would hold on to that step as though it were the key to his salvation. It was a quiet night, colder than usual, the kind that pressed frost against every window pane. The clinic's lights dimmed one by one as the staff locked up, leaving only the steady hum of machines inside the recovery ward. She lingered longer than usual, unwilling to leave, her heart pacing with an unease she couldn't name. The shepherd was stronger now, his ribs less visible, his coat beginning to regain the faintest sheen. But trust, true trust, still danced at the edge of his eyes, fleeting, fragile. That night, she chose to stay past visiting hours. She sat cross-legged on the floor near his blanket, her jacket draped over her shoulders, whispering softly about ordinary things, how the snow outside glistened, how spring would come soon, how flowers always returned no matter how harsh the winter. He watched her, his head tilted, his ears twitching at the rise and fall of her voice. Then, somewhere in the quiet, it happened. A loud crash echoed through the back corridor, a dropped tray, metal clanging against tile. Instantly the shepherd jerked upright, eyes wide, body taut with fear. His instincts surged, pulling him back toward the shadowed corner. The leash that tethered him rattled as he strained, his chest heaving, panic flooding his frame. She moved slowly, her palms open, her voice low and steady. "It's okay. It's just a sound. Nothing will hurt you." But his body trembled, memories flooding through him like wildfire. He remembered shouts, kicks, cages. He remembered hands that struck instead of soothed. His eyes darted wildly, searching for escape. Her heart pounded, but she didn't rush. Instead, she lowered herself to the cold floor, bringing her gaze to his level. Tears blurred her vision, but her voice remained steady. "Look at me." Not the noise. Me. For a moment it seemed hopeless. His chest rose and fell too fast. His nails scraped against the tiles. Then, almost imperceptibly, his gaze shifted. His eyes, those glassy pools of fear, met hers. And she stayed there, unflinching, until the panic in his frame softened by degrees. His breathing slowed, the leash slackened, and though his body still trembled, he no longer tried to flee. It was the first time he had chosen her presence over his fear. The moment stretched between them, fragile as glass, powerful as flame. She extended her hand, not to touch, but simply to offer. He lowered his head inch by inch, then pressed his nose against her fingers. She broke then, silent tears spilling down her cheeks. She had waited weeks for this, for him to believe, even for one heartbeat, that she was not like those who came before. That night, something shifted. Not just survival, not just progress. Something deeper, something binding. It was the night his heart cracked open, and trust, for the first time, stepped through. From that night forward, the shepherd was no longer just a patient. He became a companion, a shadow to her footsteps, a story unfolding beside her own. His recovery accelerated, each day carrying evidence of change. He walked with more certainty, his tail lifted in cautious curiosity. He greeted her not with fear, but with expectation. Ears pricked, eyes shining faintly with something she had never dared hope for. Trust. Yet the journey was not without its tests. There were days when the weight of memory pulled him back, when a sudden sound sent him cowering, when his body folded into itself as if expecting the past to strike again. But each time she knelt beside him, patient, steady, reminding him that healing was not about never falling, but about rising again. One morning, weeks later, she took him to the field she had once described in her stories. Grass stretched wide under the pale sun, patches of earth soft with thaw. She unclipped the leash, her breath tight in her chest. Freedom could terrify a creature so used to chains. For a moment he stood frozen, ears flicking, body taut. Then the wind carried the scent of open earth, and he bolted, not in fear but in joy. His legs stretched wide, his body cutting through the field with a power that spoke of life reclaimed. She laughed through tears, watching him run circles, his bark cracking the air like music. When at last he returned, chest heaving, tongue lolling, he trotted straight to her and pressed his head into her chest. She cradled him, burying her face into his fur, the warmth of him grounding her in a way words never could. That night, as they sat together in her small living room, the clinic days behind them, she traced her fingers over his collar. His eyes, once clouded with fear, now shimmered with quiet loyalty. He no longer watched the door in suspicion. He no longer recoiled from her touch. He had chosen her, and she, in turn, had chosen him, through storms, through doubt, through the nights where fear almost swallowed them both. The shepherd was no longer just the dog rescued from beneath a car, no longer just the frail shadow who trembled at every sound. He was her friend, her companion, a testament to what patience and love could carve from even the deepest wounds. She whispered to him as he dozed beside her, his body finally at peace. "You're home now. Forever." Outside, winter melted into spring. Inside, brokenness had grown into something unbreakable. It was the night everything had changed, not because she saved him, but because, in trusting her, he saved himself.